You probably already know that the Lamborghini Huracan is close to retirement. So close, in fact, that all remaining build slots are already spoken for. Those slots will be taken up predominantly by three models: the STO, which is a track day special with an outrageous wing, the Storato, which is a dirt road supercar that rivals the Porsche 911 Dakar, and this, the Technica. The Technica is billed as a halfway house between the excellent regular Huracan Evo rear-wheel drive and the unhinged STO. It's purely rear-driven, but also happens to have rear steering. It makes 631 brake horsepower from a sensational 5.2-litre naturally aspirated V10. It features plenty of suede upholstery, it costs around £200,000 and is, in short, Lamborghini's answer to the vaunted Porsche 911 GT3. We drove it last year and liked it, but this is our first chance to try one on UK roads. As a final outing for the 10-cylinder Lamborghini, the Technica ought to be pretty damn good.
And you know what? It is pretty damn good. And we'll come on to the reasons for that in a very short while. But let's just get the bad bits out of the way. Driving position. Driving position's actually all right. The sort of your angle in the car and your view forward, but the seats are still set a little bit high. The seats themselves are, I mean, if you've got an arse that suits these seats, they'll be fantastic, but most people, in my experience, don't. And there's just something about the way they cup you at the base of the back that isn't particularly comfortable. On more mundane matters, DAB reception is still pretty crap. I don't know why this is such a mid-engine supercar thing. Maybe it's because they want to bury the antenna sort of in the car and not spoil those lines, but it just drops in and out constantly. Likewise, infotainment looks pretty slick, but actually not that easy to use. It's a little bit latent and a bit frustrating, to be honest. Indicators still on the steering wheel, not such a big fan of that. And there's still bugger all in the way of storage. I mean, it's not that hard, is it? Ferrari offers you a reasonable amount of storage in the 296 GTB, but the Huracan is still very, very poorly endowed. So that just sort of hampers its usability a little bit, which is a shame, because actually, in terms of its dimensions, this is not a huge car. This is not a big and intimidating car like the Aventador is, or the new Revuelto will be as well. You can sort of put this down a British B road as we are now, and it's not actually particularly stressful. Now, the good bits, you slide into this car and oh my god, I mean, the Huracan is quite old now. It's due for replacement, so there'll be a V8 plug-in hybrid replacement for this car, which is being unveiled, I think, either this year or next year. But so this is a fairly old car, but you get in it, oh my god, the drama, fabulous. The rake on this windscreen is ridiculous and still one of the wonders of the automotive world. And you get in and you've just got this huge tacho in front of you. It spans the entire width of this TFT screen, runs from 0 all the way up to 10,000. Although actually this car tops out at 8,500 RPM, and its peak power figure of 631 bhp, which is the same as you get in a Performante, arrives at 8,000 RPM, so not quite the full 10. And I think the new Revuelto revs a little higher as well, so they get that V12 going to 9,500 RPM or so. A fantastic Alcantara clad steering wheel. It's so light in its action, really tactile. It's one of the things they've really improved with this car, the Huracan, over the years, is the steering, the weighting and the feedback. Obviously that engine, we'll talk more about that in a minute. These gear paddles as well, fabulous, best in the business. I'm not sure what they are. I think they may be aluminium. But the action is spot on. The action is spot on. And they've just got that sort of, they've got those Italian proportions. You really can't fail to grab them. exhausts on it. Let's just get into the engine now because it's so good. You've got to have it in sport mode to open the exhaust baffles. Never gets old. I mean, I'm sure this car's replacement, the Huracan's replacement with its V8 hybrid, is going to be incredibly fast. But they're never going to get it singing quite as well as they've got this V10 singing. And it's not just the fact that it's a V10. I mean, Lamborghini is a world expert in exhaust tuning. It's not easy. You only have to look at McLaren. You know, they've got a really revvy V8 to play with, and they've never quite managed to unlock it in terms of the acoustics. Lamborghini, what they've done with this V10, this Audi-derived V10, completely ridiculous. Years down the line, when we're all driving hybrids and electrics or whatever, people will look back at even a basic Huracan with the V10, and it will just seem like the most otherworldly, ungodly, brilliant thing. It's one of those engines where, if you've never experienced a good naturally aspirated engine, it's completely breathtaking, the response to the thing. The car gets its power down pretty damn well, considering it's just rear-wheel drive. What I have noticed already, though, is the ABS tuning, which is really sensitive. The braking remains one of the weak points of this car, unfortunately. There's way too much assistance. The bite point is incredibly high. It takes a good few miles to sort of dial into the sensitivity of the pedal. And then, yeah, that ABS just cuts in really quite early, although I think, in fairness, it's partly down to the fact that this car's wearing pretty serious Bridgestone tyres, and I don't think they're quite as warm as they'd like to be at the moment. So let's talk about that chassis a little bit. How well does it work in the UK? This kind of thing's important, after all. I've got to say, just getting from A to B, you really do need to have this thing in Strada with the dampers really backed off, because it is unforgiving. I haven't driven an Evo, a regular Evo rear-wheel drive for quite some time now, but if memory serves, then that is a softer car in the Strada mode. This thing is really quite punishing, actually. And the unfortunate thing about that is Lamborghini, and they've been told so many times by so many people, owners, journalists, that they need to have a mix and match drive mode set up, just like the Aventador does, and just like almost every rival has. They need to give you the ability to keep the dampers in their softest setting, but ramp up the engine and have the ESP intervention loosened off a little bit, because that's when the car starts to express itself. Instead, you're either locked into Strada, at which point, you know, the engine and gearbox mapping is dialed back quite a bit, and you know, the car's teeth just blunted a little bit, and obviously you've got full ESP intervention, and it's actually quite conservative. So that's in Strada. If you want to go up to Corsa, great, you get the engine on song, and my god, it's wild, and you get a lovely halfway house ESP setting, which lets the car just take a little bit of angle on the way out of bends, an almost imperceptible amount, but you, the driver, really feel it, and it's quite lovely. But you've got to cope with the chassis, which goes from being just about acceptable to kind of unacceptable, if I'm being honest. Sure, if you're on a really smooth A road, great, no problems, it's completely forgiving. It's a get out of jail free card, a perfect surface for this Lambo, but mostly in the UK, sport mode is pretty hard to live with. So in that sense, this car's still compromised. The Huracan is still compromised, even in this Technica model, where it really just does have lovely steering response and a good bit of feedback back as well, and you do get that rear drive balance coming through. You really, really do. I can't understate that. Even when you're just flowing this car through a bend at sort of 6-7 tenths, just leaning on that torque, you can sense the fact that this car is purely rear driven. So these are really, really nice things. And of course the engine response, wonderful, but to get the most out of it, you've got to have the chassis in a setting that's just too hardcore. When you tie that in with the brakes, you end up with quite a sort of rambunctious car when you don't necessarily want one. Whereas a 296 is really razor sharp and smooths out the road and gives you that perfect canvas to sort of carve through bends with. With this car, you've sort of got that sensitive brake, you've got that quite choppy ride unless the road's perfect, and it's all a bit of a distraction from what this car does well. And what it does well is dial you into the supercar experience with loads of forgiveness, loads of excitement, loads of passion. I mean, this is one of the most passionate cars in the world. And when you've got a load going through the suspension, it does sort of, with speed, you can modify the suspension a little bit, but you've really got to be on it. What it all means is that you've actually got to get quite stuck into this car to unlock it. You've got to almost bully it a little bit, which is not always the most natural thing to do in a car this fast, but it's worth getting on top of this car, because my God, when you do get stuck into it, it is absolutely superb. It does that magical mid-engine thing of just bang, getting into a corner so cleanly. But then this car's real talent is the malleable, playful way in which it just takes a little bit of yaw. I mean, on one hand, it's a complete fire-breathing thoroughbred, but on the other, it's just got this delicacy that makes it so lovely to play with. I mean, Gallardos and Huracans of old, they didn't want to do this. And if you tried to force them to do it, you could get unstuck fairly quickly. But Lamborghini seems to have had a change of philosophy, and it's been building since the Huracan. And it sort of reached its, I don't know, maybe, I think it possibly reached its zenith with the rear-wheel drive Evo. I think maybe the Technica is just a little bit too hardcore for its own good, but it's pretty academic. This thing, when you get on top of it, feels absolutely brilliant. It's got this lovely combination of being a precision tool and a complete barrel-chested, bare-knuckle fighter.
And that's the Technica in a nutshell. It's unapologetic. And if not quite in possession of STO levels of wildness, it's certainly wild enough to make even a Porsche 911 GT3 feel a bit conservative at times. Perhaps the Technica finds itself in a bit of a no man's land. It's neither as easy to get along with as the regular Huracan rear-wheel drive, nor is it as outright scintillating as the STO in the right conditions. If it were a touch more supple in its ride quality at sensible speeds, it'd be a truly outstanding proposition. Even as it is, it's a fitting finale for the Huracan. Fast, a bit flawed, but most of all, completely unforgettable.